Okay, here's my attempt to clarify what I was saying in my Make Me Atheist Again video, which was just hot off the cuff and wasn't very well articulated. But I got some comments on it, and, well, they were pretty good comments. They're still kind of missing the point. So, the idea here is that we exist in a tenseless object. We exist in a timeless object, which necessarily, whatever pieces we attribute to it, which is an assumption, right? We assume that somehow it makes sense to speak about pieces being causally related to each other within a tenseless object. And furthermore, if we then assume computationalism, so these are the two assumptions. It's the B theory of time, in which you don't have a preferred frame of reference, and you don't have some global now sweeping forward. Therefore, I'm also not claiming that there is some sort of other time outside of the sort of local times that people can identify based on their past light cone and future light cone. I'm certainly not claiming that. I am claiming that at ultimate reality, it is a static, eternal, unchanging object. But within the computations, within certain shapes produced in these computations that happen to be conscious unto themselves, there is the experience of time. The experience of time exists within the computations. So here I have two pieces. In reality, it's far more pieces, right? We tend to divide it into neurons, or sometimes people go even into the molecules in the cells. But in any case, you require at least the idea of there are two physical constituents that become bound. So the binding here is what is actually the qualia, with the experience, the inner observer moment. And if we then realize that this mechanism can't occur via a physical Newtonian mechanics sort of now that applies to it, that is sweeping forward in reality, because there isn't. That would violate relativity, right? So the only thing that could be binding these two physical constituents into a conscious experience is something that is not time dependent. Whatever it is, whether you want to call it, just causality juice, somehow this algorithm fits into this algorithm in some way that we just don't understand. Whatever it is, these things are bound into an observer moment. These pieces are not deleted, right? Because they necessarily exist from other reference frames. So even if from, you're in some other reference frame and you think that this doesn't exist, because you no longer see this configuration, you can no longer, it's no longer visible unto you, and you can never see it again in your future light cone. That doesn't mean that these pieces don't exist, because again, relativity of simultaneity and relative reference frames. So you have other people and other observer moments perfectly seeing this occurring. They could be aware of the exact same physical processes, which would yield the exact same qualia, the exact same experience. So, and this is just based on computationalism, right? This is just based on me assuming what most neuroscientists claim to be the truth. And I'm saying, okay, if I believe you, then this is what's going to happen. Not only is this going to happen that all of these are just inscribed in eternity, all experiences are just there forever, so you better watch what you're doing, but insofar as it makes sense to say that, right? At the meta level, it doesn't make sense to speak of time, but we speak because we're inside of it. We're inside of it, and we have to talk about time in order to function. It's like something it is kind of an invention. It's something we discovered and we think about. It's existing within these computations. So then, okay, here's the other counterintuitive thing. The first is that experiences are just eternal. Experiences are happening from where they are happening. if we assume physicalism. The second thing that's going to happen is that A and B, whatever they are, again, you're building some self-modeling stuff on top of whatever processing was needed to create that qualia. This perhaps was some pain processing, and then it became appropriated into the actual qualia of pain by having some effect on a complex self-model. Or you could also think about a dream character, right? This could be a dream character, and then this is you in the morning who appropriates that dream character. You remember that you had this dream character. That's something fitting into something, creating a memory in the present that necessarily has pieces that are tenseless. They're just happening where they're happening. So the second part that is very counterintuitive is that these are building on top of each other, and there seems to be no arbitrary cutoff that we know about. There's no like snug spatiotemporal room to which this belongs. If A happens to be happening in one galaxy or in one brain, what we think of as one brain, right? We project that idea, that notion, but we could be more reductionist about it and think it's all going on at the computational level. It's going on in particular functions of neurons. So wherever those neurons are, if they're fitting into each other somehow, we don't know the fitting mechanism, then they're creating an experience. So you might be creating an experience that is with a sufficiently similar thing fitting into your next experience, even if that other experience is happening in some other Hubble volume. Wherever it's happening, spatiotemporal snugness that we tend to imagine doesn't really seem to matter. And this has implications. For example, cryonics. Cryonics is going to work because it's, like the fact that you think it a long time happened doesn't matter. The fact that you wake up in the morning, right? You wake up in the morning even though the Earth went around the sun, therefore moved your room to completely different space-time coordinates, and you still wake up and appropriate those experiences. So that's a second counterintuitive. Like no little room. You don't exist in a little room. You exist in this vast computational space in which things can be built on top of other things. Persons are built on top of persons. So in the same way that I'm, in a sense, building on all those memories, on all those different people that existed in the past, and all those, in a way, dream characters now, I am the amalgamation of them. I am on top of them. I am something that is being created on top of those experiences. So what's to say that in this entire computational space, there aren't, which is tenseless again, there aren't already computations being built on top of whatever we are experiencing. If you're a pure computationalist, then you would assume that even a simple neural network built on top of individual complex persons would create a conscious observer on top of that, if you are a computationalist. So even there, you already have sort of mega people or mega dreams to which we belong, and then dreams on top of those. So it's only reasonable to assume that intelligence doesn't end at the human. Intelligence scales up, and then it's a competition of what is going to take up most of computational space. What is actually dominating most of existence, therefore, by the Anthropic principle. You're going to find yourself where you're going to find yourself, and in an anticipatory sense, so what you should anticipate is the law of total probability, is the Born rule, and these are equivalent. What a rational agent would expect to see is actually what we see. It's the Born rule. what a perfectly rational agent, mind you, right? So, and we ourselves are not perfectly rational agents. In fact, we don't even have to be thoughtful agents at all. We could have experiences that don't contain thought. Uh, and that goes to my point that you are not the sum of God in a person, obviously, because you don't have that. You're not experiencing that. You're not the omniscient thing. Perhaps the binding into a single person serves a computational role in the macro algorithm, in the macro thing that is really achieving something, or being and sustaining its own being. And so yeah, that's it. I don't see how people get the idea that you could die within this structure. Like how could you? I get how you could define people. Obviously, we could define people, and then claim that they died, and we could like take a some subsection, some sort of subsection within the entire tenseless object, and assign to it a linear sequence of events, and then say that it began here and then it died here. But hey, if some computations then appropriate this and experience themselves to have been this person, what difference does it make that some external observer here, some observer in this other location, looks at this and says, oh, he's dead, right? But then computations are built on top of whatever was happening, and they're already there, right? That's the point. Like, these other computations are already there harvesting this memory. So it doesn't, you don't die in the ultimate sense if you assume physicalism, because there's always things on top of things being, they don't have to be built, they're already there. So you have to assume that there is a mechanism by which you could disappear, you could cease to exist. You could cease to be a physical thing. And then that therefore assumes epiphenomenalism. That assumes that consciousness was like some cologne that was tagged to the physical processes, and that this could whisk away in this non-physical way. Whereas if we assume that we are just physical things, then there is no death anywhere in the absolute sense of the word death. But there is, just relative subsections that you could say, oh, well, this person looks nothing like this person, and therefore there is death. But yeah, that's the extent. There's a relative sense, and it's certainly useful from our vantage point to think that death is real and to do something about it, just in order to satiate our self-preservation instinct and have something to do, have a proper level 2 signaling to engage in.